Hi, I'm Jessica Dumas, and I'm playing with a new project idea. And what's come out of it so far is a really intelligent interview with my friend Brett Huson, who's a brand new author of a book called The Sockeye Mother. So my other really good friend, Colleen Samar, joined me in just having a really good conversation with him and hearing more about his book and how his teachings that he learned growing up in British Columbia has helped him develop this series of beliefs that he's sharing with us as an audience. So get your hands on his book. It's called The Sockeye Mother, and it's the first of a series that he's going to be developing over the next little while. And I just want to honor him and share his story. So please listen and get your hands on his book. Thanks so much. We'll start by welcoming Colleen Samar as my guest host. Colleen is a graphic designer, a clothing designer, and a writer, and the owner of Little Feather Clothing. Hi, Colleen.
Hi.
Colleen's my guest host. Happy to welcome Brett Huson, and I have your introduction as author and graphic designer.
Hi there. Yes, graphic design is part of things that I've worked on before, yes.
Yeah, so what would be your title that you would...
What's today's title?
Yeah.
Well, I like author. I like author being, because it's something that kind of came out of left field, and I didn't expect to be an author throughout my career, because my background has always been in film and television, and I've always been in marketing as a producer or a communications officer, or something like that. That work is fun. I do like that every now and then, and I'm going to be starting a new project with a good company. But author has a nice ring to it,
It does. It's very pro, right?
It's growing on me. Yes. It's growing on me, and I love that. My kids have seen my book now, and they're just amazed that that their dad has a book out.
Yeah.
A kid's book for them, and
so tell us how this got started. How did this come about?
Well, I'm originally from northern British Columbia, the Hazelton areas, or as I like to say, I'm from the Gitxsan Nation, and we're a nation that live and use unceded territory that's 35,000 square kilometers in northwest interior British Columbia, and that's how I grew up, was in a matrilineal hereditary society, governed by leaders that were men and women equally, and not different as you would see. Everything seems very patriarchal. I find that since I moved to Manitoba, it's a very patriarchal kind of mentality here that kind of leads into why I started writing my book, because outside of I noticed that there's a real disconnect between the respect that we should have for our mothers and grandmothers and the way people are now. And part of writing that book, The Sockeye Mother, was I titled it as such because I wanted the mother to be the key point of the book, and that's where everything kind of my background led me to that.
How did this opportunity happen for you?
Well, like I said, having a background in film and television, I went to Kaplan University, and I always thought that I was going to stay in film. I wanted to create film, so I came here, got a job at EPTN, and I kind of got stuck there. It kind of happens. It's a great place to be for the most part. I got a lot of good experience, met a lot of really fabulous people there, and I got stuck, and I wasn't creating the things that I wanted to create within my career. So eventually, finally, after 12 years, I made the choice that I needed to leave, because there was no opportunity for me to grow any further.
So how did you manage to do that? Because as a coach, that's what I hear from people all the time is, I feel stuck, right? I'm not happy. I'm not doing what I thought I was going to be doing. Yeah. So how do you take that leap?
Well, this is kind of funny. I had a really good manager, And my really good manager had left. And I took it as an opportunity. I took it as a sign to say, you know what, this is your chance. You know, it's either move to a different department. And News always tried to ask me to come over, but I just, you know, it wasn't for me. News wasn't for me. I think there are a lot of other people who tell news stories very well. And I tell stories well, and now I know I tell stories well, but it's a different kind of story to tell. You know, news is about sharing points immediately to people, getting things to people's eyes and ears as fast as you can.
And that's sort of led by other sources, right? It's led by what's going on. And you wanted to lead by what you wanted to share, so that is different.
I wanted to be able to influence young people. I wanted to be able to influence community members. I wanted to kind of bring back I wanted to share a different perspective. I wanted to try something new. So I had left because I no longer saw an opportunity to grow.
It sounds to me like you're a modern storyteller, but you're also following a traditional path of sharing your knowledge with youth.
Yeah, you know, it's exactly it. This book, I have a lot of great and highly educated people back home who have written books. One of my third grade teachers, you know, she ended up getting her doctorate in education, and she started writing language books and started writing our stories, our historical stories into books. So what I wanted to do was showcase our knowledge, showcase the connection we have to the land, and show that it is a scientific connection, albeit under different terms. Anthropologists and people who study Indigenous history tend to see it from a Eurocentric perspective. So they don't understand that we understand.
Right.
So they immediately dismiss things as archaic and uncivil, or you know, whatever terms they use, and they just don't know. They don't know that we understand the biology of how the world works. We can't explain everything on an atomic level, but Indigenous people had methods to understand. We understood the life cycles of salmon. We understood where they go and come from and how they impact the environment. So I wanted to show that in the books. So I wrote a story that's my own story. I told the story from the perspective of a Sockeye Mother. And so it's not an old legend. It's something that's new, but it's sharing the traditional teachings that I got from my grandmother and my grandfathers.
Very cool. So the Sockeye Mother is the name of the book.
Yes.
And you didn't start out to just say, hey, I want to write a book.
No, I thought, this was my idea. I think we had discussed it before previously. You know, I love talking with you. You always help ground me and make me feel good about my career direction again, you know.
Awesome.
But I wrote this as an article for Red Rising magazine, and the publisher from Portage and Main Press, the editor there, she happened to read it, and she loved it, and she asked me one day if I wanted to turn this into a book.
Very nice.
And so then was born the idea that I'd become an author. And you know, I love Red Rising magazine for that. It gives a great avenue for young Indigenous people to share however they want to share, whether it be through their art or through their words, whether it be under a traditional or an academic context, or whether it's like a news story.
Yeah.
They have a really good, it's a very good place to share. And it got the right exposure.
Yeah,
and
very accessible, right? Accessible to everybody.
And the responses are, I'm humbled by the response that I've had from this book. I'm very, I'm blown away. Adults are appreciating it. It was a children's book, but adults are appreciating it. A friend of mine just sent me a picture. She was gifted my book to her as a Christmas gift exchange through her work.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, and she's a manager, one of the associate managers at an RBC in BC.
So what is the official release date? So books are printed?
It's out now, yes. The books are printed.
Okay.
It's out now, but we're going to do a launch on January 4th. 7:30 p.m.
Right, January 4th, and that's at
McNally Robinson.
McNally Robinson.
Yeah.
That's
So,
exciting.
It is. I'm just. I just got an email just now, actually, just before I came here. They were. Someone gave it a 5 out of 5.
Wow.
And they said that it was something that helped give them perspective on how the lands are connected. As someone who doesn't come from the land, people don't have that kind of connection. They don't understand how the world is connected.
Yeah.
They don't understand how something as small as a salmon has impact on their whole existence. Without the forests in British Columbia, there would be no Gitxsan people. There would be no Tsimshian, Haida. Those forests exist because of the salmon.
Wow.
I think it's like the effect of colonization too, is like to disconnect Indigenous people
Very much.
from the land, so that the resources can be taken.
Yes, that's one of the things that I've very much noticed is colonization has had a detrimental effect to our cultures and our connection to the lands. And, you have this whole idea of if you're an urban Indigenous person, you don't know what it's like to grow up on the land, or if you're from the reserve, you don't know what it's like to be an Indigenous person. This whole crab in the bucket mentality comes from colonization.
Yeah.
The idea that we don't support each other is ludicrous. It's a crazy thing, but it exists.
Yeah.
How do we combat this? And I think part of the idea of this book is something that I want to convey this idea. Urban Indigenous people, like this review that I got, someone just said, I'm not connected to the land, and this connects me there. It brings me there. In some respect, I still believe that people need to spend time on the land.
Yeah.
You cannot be defending the environment if you do not understand it solely and completely. Like, live on it for a little while. I took that for granted. Like, growing up how I did, as a young Indigenous person, even the time that we did spend on the land, we were always told, back in the day we used to really live off the land. But now that I live in an urban area, I kind of see like, wow, a lot of Indigenous people are very disconnected.
Yeah.
And it really is this, we need to reestablish a connection between our urban Indigenous people and our First Nations communities.
Yeah.
Teach the First Nations communities need to understand there's a lot of valid and important information and teachings and culture they can get from urban Indigenous people. And urban Indigenous people need to understand that although someone from a reserve may not have the education they have a more valuable type of education than a school system can give them. But both are equally important in the future of our people.
Well, I think, definitely a lot of negatives. And I always try to look at a lot of the positives. And I think some of what that has done is created leaders in many different areas, right? Leaders in a lot of those teachings, connectedness to the land, culture, and then leaders in other areas. So I like to think that in the future we'll see more whole relationships. But I think, like exactly what you're talking about, people are disconnected from their identity, right? And not at a fault of our own.
No.
Because I've received judgment from different people at times, and I'm working with my whole heart. Like, I'm not out to belittle anybody else's.
Yeah, it's not about looking at the negative, it's about looking at the positive and what can we do individually to make it better for our children, for everyone.
And being someone from out of the province, going to ceremonies here, like I've had family ties to Manitoba long before I was born. So people, they see me at ceremonies all the time, and I do things like Sundance here. I work with a lot of amazing people, and I experienced criticism from people here who are like, "Oh, you're just another city Indian, or you're just an urban Indigenous person," but then I was showing them how to chop wood all these guys who come from the bush but don't know how to chop wood properly because either they didn't grow up with their grandparents or they didn't really spend time on the land even though they're from the reserve.
Yeah.
But they had an opportunity to criticize me because they thought that it didn't come from that.
Right.
But then,
And I think it's something that, like, and it's hard for me to say it at the time, but sometimes I want to say, well, it's not my fault I'm colonized, right?
Yeah.
It's not your fault. Like, it's just what it is.
Yeah. And there's a time and a place for everything, and I think if you're traditional, you shouldn't be judging.
No.
It's the basis of our culture.
Yes.
It's not
And I think everybody, right? Everybody
Yes.
has to be less
Very much.
judgmental.
Yes.
Yeah.
For sure.
And I always battle that myself every day. Like, I have to remind myself because it's just something that you can't get rid of it right away.
Yeah.
And I probably never will get rid of it myself. With my kids, I have to have the opportunity to make them better than me. And that's what our tradition has always been. You always try to make a better version of yourself in your own kids or your nieces or your nephews, because traditionally every kid was a child of the community or your family or you look after everyone. And I have a lot of friends who can't have kids, but they're amazing influences to young people. And that's one of the things that I think is missing, is that community connectedness throughout everywhere, the urban, rural, something that we need to understand is there's benefits of everyone's education, whether it be traditional or Western. There's benefits to both, and there's the ability to preserve our people for the future through both types of education.
Yeah, for sure.
So is your book, is the audience intended to be Indigenous youth?
Just youth in general, not just Indigenous people. I wanted non-Indigenous people to see this, and there's a doctor, a non-Indigenous doctor who works for the Pacific Salmon Foundation who gave this a highly recommended review.
Very nice.
And he sees it as beneficial in addition to everything else that's been written about salmon, because there's a lot of documentation out there about salmon. But the way that I wrote this is a little more poetic than you would find in an academic paper. People generally don't want to read academic papers, they want to read a story. And it's not, I love academic papers myself. I love to hear studies, read studies, compare with Indigenous knowledge, etc. But he said this gives a new outlook into not just the salmon, but also the way Indigenous people live in the environment. And David Suzuki says that there's a lot of potential in learning from Indigenous knowledge for environmental protection. So I think that's something that I want to start doing with the writing I'm doing. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for a lot of other Indigenous artists and storytellers and politicians and everyone else from different parts of life to contribute to that. To start to say, this is our people, this is how we connect with the land. And I know that some places have been so far removed because they've been colonized longer than we have in BC, but there's still a bit of knowledge through ceremony, a bit of knowledge in us, genetic knowledge that's been there for thousands of years. You can't get rid of that in a generation.
Yeah.
So it's something that we can just start to tap into. And I think a lot of it is instilling pride, reinstilling the pride for being Indigenous.
Right. And kids going to school saying, oh, I can relate to this book, I can relate to this author, right? For people like me and maybe Colleen, and I don't know if you grew up in BC?
Yeah.
But going to school and reading books, right? It was always the non-Indigenous, the white community, and what their prescription for what our life should look like. And we
Until
never
grade
measured up.
6. Grade 6, I read Beatrice Culleton, In Search of April
Oh, I
Ridge.
think I did in grade 7 or 8.
and got to meet her. They actually brought. So that was
Do you know that book?
groundbreaking.
Which one?
In Search of April Rain Tree by Beatrice Culliton?
No, I don't think I
So
got to
it's
read
like
that
it's a Métis girls coming of age, Métis Indigenous girl.
I've heard of it, yes.
It's
And
a good.
it's set in Winnipeg in the 70s,
Yeah.
and it's a traumatic life, and
And I
going
think
through
as young girls, like we
Yeah.
could relate to her, right?
Yes.
I grew up in the North End, so they talk about a lot of the streets names. So I would drive around, well, on my bike, and there's the that must be
Yes.
the building, and it probably wasn't the same building, but in my
Yeah.
imagination, I could connect.
Which is what
Yes.
books are supposed to do.
Right.
Exactly.
But it was the first book.
Yes, and going through racism and stuff from that perspective, from a young person, because that's when you're first, treated like that and everything, and so it makes you feel like you're not so alone when you have these other
Yeah.
voices that you
Yeah.
can kind of connect with, and so it's interesting to meet her.
I'll definitely read that now.
Yeah.
It's
I have
it's
the
a
book.
Great, yeah, it's a great book. It's a great book.
I'll lend you the book.
And that's one of the things, like, growing up in BC, seeing the education system, stuff that was written about Indigenous people, like when I first went away to university, I argued with the professor, like saying, this is really, really wrong. And they were just so disappointed, like they were mad that I was telling them that it was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And I was saying, well, how can you guys tell us what our history is? Like, you guys don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're reading something that someone else wrote. They had no clue what they were talking about. And, that's what you consider a history of Canada. And this was, long before I know more. This was just me in university, which I'm sure a lot of other Indigenous people had done with professors at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Those who were brave enough to stand up for it or didn't want to hide who they were. I think just growing up with the women I did, and that's the key thing, is growing up with having the pride from the women, but also having the balance of the fathers there. That's something that I also think it needs to happen more.
Mm-hmm.
Is in teaching men more about respect about women, they will then become better father figures.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Whether they're uncles or whether they're grandparents. I just believe there's a lot more that men need to relearn, because we've picked up so many bad habits from colonization as men.
Mm-hmm.
But the same thing goes for women too. There's a lot of women who don't have the traditional teachings anymore on how to be a good person, and both, especially men though, I think need a lot more balance.
Mm-hmm.
Balance is a kind of like a key word, I guess you could say.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of that comes from what you read in school, and a lot of what you're taught in school.
Mm-hmm.
Especially using these old school industrial age teaching methods that they use now, it's not gonna help anybody. It doesn't promote growth, and so there's just so much that I think there needs to be change out there, and not just for Indigenous people, but if we want to be really a country, this, I don't like using the term reconciliation, because I think it's there's a lot.
Their word. It's not our word.
They use reconciliation, I think, a lot. The government uses it a lot because it makes them feel better about the guilt of everything that's happened to our people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing, is they got to get over that guilt. Like, it happened.
Mm-hmm.
It happens. This is, you got to get over that guilt of knowing that that's the true history of Canada.
True, yeah.
Genocidal behavior is the true history of
Yeah.
Canada. And there's no other way about it. Until they start to acknowledge that, then they'll start to become true leaders in humanitarian causes.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think is a more appropriate word, if you don't like reconciliation, what is a more appropriate word for what's happening in Canada right now? Because I'll use that word, and but there's something going on in Canada, right? And I use the phrase Indigenous Renaissance, because what I'm seeing is that Indigenous people in Canada are for the first time getting the attention that they've never received before. And we know the reasons why. some of the...
I like the term Renaissance. You know, whether it be a historical Renaissance, a cultural Renaissance, or it's just a rebirth, and the rebirth will happen through artists. Artists were once key members of Indigenous society that were protected, that were looked after far more than most, because they kept the histories and the teachings of grandmothers and grandfathers. And it's not just like someone who paints. I mean, but what I mean by artists are storytellers and history keepers and carvers and yes, painters, and because art through Indigenous society was beyond just what there is in arts right now in Canada. So, you know, like architects or builders are artists in our perspective. So they played a key role in all society, I think, in how we remember things and tell things. So I think our culture will be reborn through the artists that we have now that are out there. The people who are telling the stories, the people who are creating new ones. And I think now is not only remembering the past, but forging a new path forward through our storytelling.
So Louis Riel said, "My people will be awakened by the artists," or something like that. Do you guys know that phrase?
Yeah.
There aren't any Métis in BC. I mean, now they have I guess buildings in Vancouver maybe or something.
Yeah.
But traditionally there are no Métis in
Yeah.
BC, so I didn't know the history. I didn't know the history until I came over here. I mean, you hear about it in the history books, but I never believed what was in the history books, because it was, like I said, I didn't see it as truth.
Yeah.
It's a prairie thing. Definitely.
Yeah.
It comes from this area.
I know of the uprising, and I know of the Cree people who were hung with him. So I do know that's one thing that's not mentioned a lot. People don't realize that he wasn't a lone gunman or a lone protester. He did it with the help of other Indigenous people.
Yeah, for sure.
And but yeah, like I think that saying is something that might have been foreseen by many different Indigenous people, because it's something that our people talk about, especially in the West Coast. You see the way our abstract art is, or formline art, which a lot of people in Canada just call Haida art, but it's not Haida art, it's formline art. Haida art is one of the people who have a style that do that. Formline art is a way that we kept our history. Formline art is very precise in the way that it's drawn. And the reason we did formline art is it was our perspective on how the spirit holds together the body. So when we draw things, that's our interpretation of the spirit of anything, even inanimate objects. And for our understanding, we understood this energy, or what we call spirit, is what holds everything together. So we drew the things using very precise shapes, and we believe that these shapes are what held the world together.
Very cool.
I mean, now science says, okay, it's atoms and energy that hold everything together. We call it spirit,
Yeah.
because it's our spirit. You are nothing without the energy.
For sure, yeah, I totally agree with that. So, with what you just shared about the artists being the ones to bring back that renaissance or resurgence, you're right in there, and you didn't even really expect to be, right? Like you've written a book, you're getting great reviews. It's going to be probably used in schools. Like, people are going to be pulling this book, and it's just the start of saying, here's the teaching from Indigenous people in a storytelling way. So what's next?
I really want to kind of inspire others to follow suit. I had a message recently. Someone from the Six Nations asked me if I can go and consult and then write a book about their people. Like, I said to them, like, it would be fabulous if you could write your own book. I mean, I would love to go there. You know, it'd be fun to travel and do those kind of projects.
Yeah.
But I think the spirit of the knowledge will come through the people within their own nation.
So how would you encourage someone if they're like, well, I don't know where to start, I don't know what to do?
education is definitely key in that you want to be able to communicate with the Western world now as it is, because the world is connected through the internet. The world is connected beyond our trading routes and beyond our traditional methods. So having a Western education is definitely key, but it's not going to be the only way. I think if you aren't a good writer, but you want to tell your story, then maybe you can work with a writer and try to find something that you can share. But I think because writing it in English, it's a difficult thing to do sometimes, especially trying to convey parts of your history that are in your language. Because English is a poor language to translate things into. It's not a language of the world. It's a language that the world uses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So our own traditional languages come from the earth. Your languages are shaped by the lands that you grow on.
Mm-hmm.
So all of the languages that, the indigenous languages that you see around the world, or languages that were born of the land, those are the ones that hold the true histories.
Mm-hmm.
English was something that was born out of a need to communicate between many different places.
Also a language of commerce.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Just like numbers, they wanted something that was like numbers, that was universal.
Right.
So
Makes sense.
Do you think Salmon Mother will be a film in the future? Just because you have like a TV background and film background.
I was offered before that someone wanted to turn it into an animation, and the reason I didn't do it initially is because you lose a little more of the creative control you have on telling the story when it comes to television, unless you're the director yourself. And funding films in Canada is really difficult to get the amount you need to do a proper project. I know I have a lot of friends who are amazing producers. One of my teachers, a bunch of my teachers are those who work in the industry. Like Jordan Wheeler was a teacher of mine. Crazy Jordan, he is an amazing writer. I love everything that he taught me. Jeff Bear is a producer, another great producer that he's got a very stern belief system, and he's very strong in his words, but he knows how to make good projects, and you know, those are the people that taught me and influenced me, and so through them I kind of know how difficult it can be to do projects through film and television. So maybe eventually I'd love to see that. I want to complete the Mother series to see where that goes and how it turns out into the story, and then maybe it will turn into a series or an animated series, because I think that would be another good medium to get across to the world. But I've had a lot of great teachers in my life. I'm very blessed that not just within my nation but many nations. You know, through ceremony here I had a lot of teachers who are in the Anishinaabe and Cree and Dakota and Sioux, and you know, like people that have nothing but good heart and soul to share. You know, and so I'm really blessed that way.
So for this journey through your book writing and publishing into having the actual book be a book, what was the biggest obstacle?
I think the biggest obstacle for me was really just ensuring that nothing was really touched in the story, so that it could come across exactly how I intended it to. And I work with Portage and Main Press, and we just spent time I spent time going through the contract. I rewrote quite a bit to ensure that it kind of happened the way that I wanted to, and they're amazing to work with.
Good.
And they didn't really touch anything on my book. They loved how it was written, and I was surprised with that because I know a lot of things go through a lot of edits.
And you hear a lot of stories about
Yeah.
stories being edited.
And they didn't do anything other than make some notes about some of the words I used, because they were pretty big words like soliferous or innuendos. Like, it might have been a little bit difficult for young people, but I also think that we need to give young people a little more credit
True.
'Cause
They
they're going to be a lot more advanced than we were at that age.
they hear and see things that we don't even know they're hearing and seeing.
Yeah, and my son is already reading at an advanced level in his school. So, you know, it's something that I see, even though now it's a concern, but the kids now, because of the access they have to the internet, they're going to learn at a faster rate.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think once we start to change the method of teaching, they'll pick up things a lot, even faster. You know, like right
Amazing.
now, the way everything is set up is they say, oh, so-and-so is not doing so good in math, so let's hold them behind,
Yeah.
which is completely ridiculous.
Yeah.
Because someone might just need a little more help with math, but you shouldn't hold them back because of that. Someone might have a little more trouble writing, but they're brilliant with chemistry or mathematics. So you shouldn't hold them back, but that's the way the system works right now.
Yeah, really try and
And
utilize those gifts that they have.
They have people who might be slower learners in a slower learning program that doesn't teach you much.
Yeah, match the learner, right? That's what we need to do more of.
Totally, and traditional teaching methods are where you would work with what the young person loved. And that's kind of, I think, what we need to start to do is our young people, when we see them fall in love with something, encourage them to do that. If someone falls in love with computers, let them spend time on the computer. You know, or if someone loves carving, give them some tools to carve for a while when they're young.
Yeah.
Let them love and enjoy it. You know, don't tell them to be quiet when they want to talk, or just, the discipline can come in other ways. But when you're learning, it shouldn't be so strict.
I agree. Any final comments that you want to share?
I'll just thank you so much for the opportunity to be a part of this, and I know that we'll definitely work on something in the future together. And I just, I want everyone to feel free to ask me questions if they have any questions about the book, or if they just want some advice, or if they need to contact me. I'm on social media, on Twitter.
So how do they find you?
My Twitter is at BD Huson, so BDHUSON, and my Instagram is the Gitsan.
So
Awesome.
I'll share that all with the link. So January 4th, 7:30 p.m. at McNally Robinson is the book launch.
That's
For
right.
Brett Huson and the Sockeye Mother, the first of the Mother series. And thank you for coming. Thanks so much. I enjoy doing this. I hope to continue doing more, and I know that we'll do more together. Awesome.
Sure.
Thank you, Miigwech.
Miigwech.